something interrupted it. It's not the kind of thing
That's the truth.
you can't tell where.
Thank you for coming out this afternoon to the Hunt Library and to the exhibition From the Great Falls to the Hilltops. A lot of people worked on this. I worked on it for about 9 years. Then the pandemic got in the way and other things got in the way. But Rika Laser and her sister Sarah were on board since the fall of 21. And now we're all ready to show it to you. I have some thank yous to make before we start. I want to thank everyone at the Falls Village Canaan Historical Society who made this exhibition of Mabel Holloway's photography collection a reality. Judy Jacobs, Midge Cortese, Cheryl Eichleman. They chose the clothing on exhibit 2 with Michelle Major and T.T. Hall. A very special thanks to Rika Laser. Without her skill in scanning and printing, we wouldn't have got to this stage. And I'm very grateful for the volunteers. I want to thank the Hunt Library Board and its director, Meg Scher, for the support and encouragement over the last year, and to the Friends of David M. Hunt Library for always making sure we have plenty of nibbles at our receptions. Lastly, I want to thank our business supporters, including National Iron Bank, Parson Weems Publisher Services, and More and More Printing in Millerton. Daniel Karp is joining us today to talk about the progress of photographic technology. He has taught photography at Bard College at Simon's Rock since 2014, as well as alternative process workshops in various settings, including the graduate photography program at Yale. Thank you for coming. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Garth, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to try to take you on a half-hour, super quick, but hopefully fairly in-depth cruise through the first 100 or a little bit less years of photography. I want to start by setting up a contact print. This is how early photographs often would have been made. So this is going to get exposed to the sun while I'm talking, and hopefully we'll have an image at the end. So this is an 8x10 negative made with this camera here. That's going to go in this frame against this piece of glass. No longer made, but have an unreasonable authority that it still works. We'll see what happens. A little bit of an experiment here. So this is what the paper looks like, and it goes over the negative, and this is called a split back contact printing frame. So these springs hold the negative and the paper in tight contact, and since this is a printing out paper, the image will appear on the paper, and the way you determine the exposure is by opening half the back, lifting it up, and peeling the paper back and looking at it. So I'm going to just run this down into a window back here quickly, and then hopefully by the end we'll have something to see.
You're good? You're all good. You're all on the stand.
If you go way back, really the inception of the idea or the possibility of photography would be the camera obscura, or the ability of light to create an image. And that was first really the earliest indication of that is actually 5th century BC. There's a Chinese philosopher, Mo Ti, who wrote about observing the fact that if there was a very small hole and light went through it into a darkened enclosure, it would create an image. And that's basically what a camera obscura is. It's a dark room with a very small hole. The idea of light making an image has been around for a long time. But then the idea of how to capture that, was something that is really not down to one person, like any invention. I think it's a combination of different people at different times. But for all intents and purposes, the two people who are credited, quote unquote, with the invention of photography are Louis Daguerre, French, daguerreotype, and these are mirrored images, so you really have to come up and hold one and look at it. So after I'm done, please do that, because that's the way to really experience them. And then William Henry Fox Talbot, English, and he was almost simultaneously came up with the salt print. Not as exciting. This is a modern salt print. I don't have any vintage salt prints because an image on metal, a daguerreotype, will last much longer than an image on paper. There's a quote by Arthur C. Clarke about technology, that successful technology should be indistinguishable from magic. And I think that really applies nicely to the inception of photography. A lot of this stuff is happening in a really short time. You have the daguerreotype at 1839, the salt print around the same time, 1840. Then these other processes come in quick succession, 1850, 1860, and I'm going to cover those too in a minute. Talbot's process initially was just kind of like a sun print. This is a cyanotype, but the idea of just laying something on a sensitized piece of paper where the object blocks the light and the rest of the paper, in the case of the salt print, would turn brown, not blue. But then he discovered that if he put a piece of sensitized paper into the camera, he would get a negative image, and then if he took that negative image and sandwiched it together with another sensitized piece of paper, he would get a positive. And that became the fundamental foundation for modern photography. Around 1850, the wet plate process came along, and that enabled the glass negatives to be made. And that would be the start of that. So this is a glass negative. I'll just kind of hold it up. And collodion is what makes this possible. So collodion, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's kind of a syrupy type of substance, and to make a wet plate negative or a tintype, the tintype is the same process. This is a modern tintype, and then I have some vintage ones too. It's the same idea. This is on metal. It's actually not tin. It's usually iron. Tin was kind of a generalization. But the collodion is poured on. It's kind of like maple syrup, and you move either the metal or the glass around until you get an even covering. Then you put this into silver nitrate bath, and then then it's light sensitive. So then you have to have a dark room of some kind, and this all has to happen in 10 minutes. So so that had to come out of the silver nitrate, go into a plate holder that then went into the camera, something like this but probably smaller. The picture would be exposed, the plate would be taken out, back into the darkroom, and go through a development process. You also got to the point around 1889, I believe, that Kodak made their first flexible film. And that changed everything too, because up until this point you had stuff on glass, you had tin, the daguerreotype was on copper that was silver plated. So all these things made it impossible to take multiples inside a camera. But once you had flexible film that could be sensitized with silver halides and rolled up, then you had the possibility of taking multiples quickly and easily inside a camera. I think probably the majority of these pictures were made on nitrate-based film, probably around the turn of the century. That's probably what people would have been using. And they would have been using a Kodak Brownie, something like this, which probably a lot of you have seen. It's about as basic as you can get. This came out in 1900, but it holds roll film, it's inexpensive, it makes reasonably good pictures, it's very easy to use, and that's kind of where you get into the mass marketing of photography. Before that, you know, people went to a photography studio to have portraits made, or, you know, sought out a photographer. There weren't that many amateur people practicing photography. For obvious reasons, it was more difficult. This was used as a press camera. That's what it was designed for. Normally would have had a big flash attachment. I think probably most people have seen these in period films, you know, the Fleet Street hacks or whatever you want to call them, showing up with these things. This is called a twin lens camera. Two lenses, one has a shutter in it, and that's the lens that exposes the bottom lens, and the top lens is the viewing lens. You look down through it. And another sort of seminal event in photography was the Polaroid. In 1948, this is an earlier Polaroid, and maybe some of you remember this. You would take the picture and pull out a piece of paper and pull the film out and peel it apart and wait and pray something came out, and then you get all this chemistry all over you, and, you know, but people loved it. The final camera I'll talk about, this is from the 30s. This is a cheap, I think this is actually a knockoff of a Kodak camera. But again, this is a roll film camera. If you come up and look at this, you look through this thing to compose, and it's, no wonder anyone got any kind of reasonable picture. It's really distorted and weird. Last but not least, let me see what happened to this picture that we're exposing. Okay, so everyone remembers the Arthur C. Clarke quote.
Here is Mabel Halloway as a young lady. She lived from 1893 to 1991. Wow. So she was just shy 2 years of 100. Again, social media, the newspaper tells you everything everyone's doing. The following named persons from South Canaan attended church last Sunday here in East Canaan. And they list all their names. Marshall Dean, that was the father. Harry, Nellie, Bessie, and Mabel were the kids. Miss Hallie Millard and some other people. And Mr. and Mrs. Walter Kellogg. And Mrs. Nelson Dean. Then we see Miss Mabel Dean has a new piano. Mabel was the organist at the South Canaan Church for a very, very long time. Lots of people remember her. And other things we know about her is that berry picking was a better occupation than haying on Variety Farm last week, as is shown by the fact that the three young ladies in one day picked 126 quarts of blackberries.
Wow.
The pickers were Miss Mabel Dean, Miss Ruth Bosworth, and Miss Julia Piscini. Now we get to talk about birthdays. Mabel has 3 birthday announcements in the newspapers here. The first was her 19th birthday, where she was pleasantly surprised by a postcard shower, 22 in number, a birthday cake, 2 letters, and by finding through the day in different places, 54 5-cent pieces. Who says Mabel is not a popular lady? Now, a little diversion to Granges and Grange Halls. This was probably the Dean girls' first civic engagements. I'm sure we all know about Grange Halls, but basically they were organizations. They were an organization of farmers, and they would get together and talk about their crops, what they were planning to do, how well they did with last year's, and what their needs were. The Granges did 2 amazing things in the 19th century. They lobbied for freight costs to be lower, so they can get their goods across the country. The other thing they did was to get mail delivery to rural routes. You'd have to travel some ways to get mail back then, but the Grange organizations lobbied for it and got it. The Granges had roles for young women, and they were named after Roman goddesses. So Mabel was, at one point, was a Pomona, the goddess of fruit trees, and she also her responsibilities included setting up of meetings, making sure everyone had there was fresh flowers and things to drink and stuff. Mabel's sister Nellie was appointed role of Ceres, the goddess of grain, around this time as well. And there was also the role of Flora that was responsible for sending cards, fruits, and flowers to Grange members at the time of illness or death. Here's another birthday announcement. This one's really exciting. This is her 21st birthday. And she received a molding board, a rolling pin, apple core, cookie cutter, mixing dish, rattle, Lincoln pennies by the hundreds, of which Miss Dean is saving, dress trimmings, beautiful cloth, a beautiful dress for a beautiful girl, a cut glass dish, 21 new 5-cent pieces, a small parasol, and a Carrie Nation hatchet and a $1 bill. Does everyone know about Carrie Nation?
Oh, yeah.
Where are you?
What's his drink?
She was not a drinker, she was a leader in the temperance movement. And she took a lot of joy in going into bars and totally smashing all the bottles of liquor.
She looks like she would do that.
So she was also a pop culture thing at the time.
Yeah.
These Carrie Nation hats, the one you see there, the Carrie Nation hat that I put there, is a pin. And the temperance movement, I know we look back on it and think Prohibition must have been awful and stuff. But the truth is, everyone drank beer all day long because they didn't have fresh water.
Yeah.
And it affected the economy, it affected production. So the temperance movement was actually a huge thing, to the point that 21-year-old Mabel gets a Carrie Nation hatchet for her birthday. Here's an example of a whole bunch more of them. This is the wedding of Mabel to Herbert Halloway, or Bert Halloway, as he's known. An informal reception was given immediately after the ceremony, and bountiful luncheon was served, and the wedding cake, which was made by Mrs. Arthur S. Dean, was cut by the bride, after which the happy couple left amid a generous shower of rose petals, confetti, and rice for an extended trip to Albany, Buffalo, and the Middle West. This is sweet down at the bottom. I know you can't really see it. Mrs. Herbert Holloway both saw and heard a bluebird one day last week. Miss Ruth Bosworth has arbutus in bloom. Pheasants have been seen on the road, not far from the church. Forerunners of spring.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have this with me, but she and Bert are celebrating their golden anniversary. I mentioned before about the South Canaan Church, which we call the Meeting House today. Towards the end of its use, or actually disuse, Mabel was the de facto caretaker of the place. So when the Historical Society decided that they wanted to buy it, all the meetings to decide those things took place in her parlor. And I guess it moved pretty fast, because that's just October 15th, and then October 22nd it was decided. And the Historical Society, of course, still owns and takes care of it. And as I was reminded today by Cheryl, the Historical Society takes care of 3 buildings in town. They take care of the depot, they take care of the BB Hill Schoolhouse, and they take care of the South Canaan Meeting House. How they do this, I do not know. It's a lot. Now this is Mabel's profile in the Lakeville Journal that was published a year before she passed. This is, I was happy to find this, or given it actually, by the Historical Society, because towards the end of it, which I have there, Mrs. Holloway has recorded family events, local happenings, and people and personal collection of journals and photo albums that date from the first decade of this century, last century of course, to the present. One of her favorite pastimes is taking photographs. Nestled in with a small bundle of photos and old letters is a small piece of paper with a message she came across and jotted down years ago. You do what you can for as long as you can. And when you finally can't, you do the next best thing. You back up, but you don't give up.
You're here.
So when Mabel died, there was an estate sale towards the end of the year in 1991. That's where the glass slides were purchased. A member of the Historical Society bought a box of about 80 slides, and they are the foundation of this exhibit. In addition to that, Elizabeth Clark bought the bulk of the rest of them. And thanks to Elizabeth, she set them all up in new archival envelopes and boxes. But she never really did anything with them. I remember her telling me about it one day, and she said, "This is really, really important." And she didn't do anything about it though. I don't know why, but then she moved out to Arizona, and the slides that she had resided with Sue Dean, Mabel's great niece, who lives in Torrington. I was talking with her a month before the exhibit opened, about a full month and a half before. And I'd been trying to get in touch with her for 2 years or so. And she finally called me and said, I've got 500 glass slides in the back of my car and I don't know what to do with them. I've decided that they should be at the Historical Society. So she delivered them in February, and
They're all scanned.
they're all scanned, all 500 already? Well, I'll look forward to seeing them when I get this out of my system.
Mary Garland just completed them.
Wow, that's a big task.
Yeah.
And you know, we should be really grateful of this collection, and that Mabel was a photographer, and that she was always documenting sights and scenes and people around here. Because now we're the beneficiaries of those, and we'll be able to see what life was like back then.
So maybe next year we could do part 2.
Or 2 years from now. No,
Midge just showed up.
Hey Midge, here she is, our chief researcher.
Up the traffic on 84 that was routed from 95.
Here's Mabel sometime later in life, and this is her obituary. She was honored last year. This is 1991, so 1990. She was honored last year as the oldest living member of the South Canaan Congregational Church, where she was the organist for many years. And then, a few weeks after she passed, this was published in the Lakeville Journal, kind of as a memorial to her. It's about the trees on Under Mountain Road and how they should be conserved and taken care of, like getting rid of the poison ivy that's growing up them and things like that. 1 or 2 of them look particularly bad, says Jack Farr, a resident of Under Mountain Road and a longtime friend of the Deans and Halloways. Right now, nothing's been done. Something should be written up to preserve them in their memory. I'm sure a forester or arborist could look in to see what could be done. She lived her whole life here. It would be nice to give something like this back to her and the whole family.
Amen.
And that is the end of the presentation.
Very nice.